Okay, started the recording. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so for today, we continue with the chapter on Venerable Mahākaccāna, and we'll be covering some of the suttas that he was mentioned in those suttas. Okay, so the title of today's chapter is the Elaborator of Brief Statements, and that was what Venerable Mahākaccāna was well known for. Okay, so the Buddha honored the Venerable Mahākaccāna by naming him his foremost disciple in the ability to provide detailed expositions of his own brief statements. Mahākaccāna earned this distinguished title principally because of 8 suttas found in the Nikayas. So 3 of them in the Majjhima Nikaya, 3 of them in the Samyutta Nikaya, and 2 in the Anguttara Nikaya. So for today's readings, we'll cover the ones on Majjhima Nikaya. So, and besides these, we find in the Nikayas several other discourses of Mahākaccānas that are not based on brief utterance of the Buddha. So taken together, all these discourses have a uniform and distinctive flavor that reveal the qualities of the mind from which they sprang. They are thorough, balanced, careful, and cautious, substantial in content, meticulous in expression, incisive, well-conceived, and well-rounded. They are also admittedly a little dry, unemotional and unsentimental, and bare of the rhetorical devices utilized by other renowned exponents of the Dhamma. So here what it's trying to say is those suttas that featured or discourses that where Mahākaccāna was giving elaborations or explanations, they are very thorough. They cover a lot, very detailed, very meticulous, but also a bit dry. So not very emotional, not with a lot of drama, let's say. I'm not saying that the other suttas where the other senior disciples were featured were of drama. That's not what I mean, but what I'm trying to say is the suttas that because they're more so Mahākaccāna is good in explaining where the Buddha may have just mentioned a brief statement and left off. And some of these statements could have been very abstract or very deep in meaning. And so it's not like something that maybe someone without deep understanding in their practice would be able to capture fully. And these topics are usually sometimes because they're so abstract or so deep in meaning, it may come across as a little bit dry or a little bit, let's say, for lack of a better word, technical, let's say. But for those who understand truly, then we'll be able to appreciate what Venerable Mahākaccāna's role was in the in the Sangha. Okay, so the other thing that commentary mentioned here or offered here is that we find in them no similes, no parables, no stories. And their language is plain but impeccably precise. So in some of these suttas where Mahākaccāna was featured, it's not like there was a story behind it. Maybe it's just a normal sermon that the Buddha was giving to the monks. Whereas some of the other suttas, we can see that there was some story that had a background setting to the sutta, and so made it a little bit more interesting. Or in some others, there were similes. In the Majjhima Nikaya itself, there are a number of suttas that the Buddha offered that were explained through similes. But in a lot of this, what the commentary is trying to say here is that the suttas that Mahākaccāna were featured quite often did not include these traits. Okay, so let's continue here. So in this respect, his sermons contrast with those of the Buddha, of Sariputta, and of Ananda, all of whom were skilled in devising striking similes that impress the formal message of the discourse indelibly on the auditor's mind. So Mahākaccāna's discourses, it seems, owe their effectiveness entirely to their content rather than to literary embellishment, but with no wastage of words. They never fail to lead straight to the heart of the Dhamma. So what I'm trying to say is, in the suttas where Mahākaccāna was mentioned, although it lacked or it didn't have all these similes, stories, background, setup, and stuff like that, but the content of the sutta itself was effective in the sense that it really tried to deliver what was the essence of the Dhamma at a very deep level. Okay. So it could have been attributed to Mahākaccāna as his character, let's say, which is quite different from a lot of the others. So let's continue. Yeah? As an analyst of the Dhamma, Mahākaccāna most closely approximates to the Venerable Sariputta, and indeed the discourses of both exhibit similar traits. The difference between them is principally a matter of emphasis rather than of substance. So Sariputta's Dhamma talks, as seen, for example, in the Samaditi Sutta and the Mahāhattipadopama Sutta, begin with a specific topic, which they develop analytically by dissecting that topic into its components and exploring each component in turn, often with still finer subdivisions. So here they try and say how Sariputta's Dhamma talks are delivered is there is a topic, okay? So let's say if we take the Anupada Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 111, right, which is used in the Twin Retreats. What Sariputta did was, it was a specific topic, right? There's a topic about how he went through the different levels of the jhanas, not in one sitting. If I recall, please correct me if I'm wrong. It was over the course of 2 weeks, I think. But it was a clear explanation of how Venerable Sariputta explained in detail the processes of going through the different jhanas as almost like laying out a map, so to speak. So his way of elaboration is like he'll take a topic in that particular sutta is the topic of the different jhana levels up till Nirodha. And so he would go through that in detail and in where necessary, maybe not in 111, but where necessary, sometimes while breaking down each topic, he may break down even further. So very detailed. And in a sense, an analytical approach, let's say. So almost like trying to think of a simpler. So almost like, let's say you want to describe a car to someone who doesn't understand what a car is. So you could say, okay, a car is a type of equipment where you can use it to take you from A to B. So the topic is the car. And then this way of explanation is it will start to break down the car into each component. Okay, so the car is made up of many different parts. Its frame, and then there's the engine, and then there are the wheels, the tires, and then also in the frame itself. So in the front of most cars, you have the engine, the chassis, the I'm not an expert on cars, but all the things that go on the front of the car. And then at the back, there is the boot of the car where you can put some storage in. And then there are wheels, suspension, tires. So it's probably a poor analogy of how Venerable Sariputta's approach is, but that's how he tries to explain topics in the suttas. He takes a topic and then he breaks it down. And then if necessary, some get broken down further. So let's say, okay, now I'm going to talk about the engine of the car. And the engine is made up of the chassis, the spark plugs, whatever else goes into the engine. And if the engine doesn't work, then this is what happens. So it's a very analytical, dissecting kind of approach is what the commentary here is trying to say. Okay. Not a very good analogy, but I hope it gives an idea of how people who think in a structured, analytical way tend to explain things. So there are many different ways to teach, let's say. Okay. And the Buddha, why the Buddha is so great is because he had the ability, he had the wisdom. Of course, he not only had the knowledge of his own past lives, but also the past lives of others. But he also, he was a great elucidator. That means very good in speaking. So he had that ability, skill, let's say. But also he knew how to teach in a way that would suit, let's say, the individual that he was trying to help. Or if it were a larger group, then I can only imagine that he would be delivering a message that would make sense to the majority of that group. So teaching one-to-one and teaching in a group is very different. Teaching one-to-one, the teacher will then predominantly cater the delivery of the teaching towards how the teacher, let's put it this way, how the teacher perceives the student to be able to receive as much knowledge and information as possible. And this is dependent on the student's perception, of course, but the student's level of understanding. So in the case of the Buddha, and I'm assuming here also the senior disciples that are arahats, they would have the knowledge of where, just by through conversation, yeah. The Buddha probably will have an upper hand. But for the rest who do not have that ability, then through conversation, if it were a one-to-one teaching, just teacher and student, through conversation, we'll be able to know where the student's level of understanding is. And then the teacher will then adjust the delivery of the teaching to suit the student's level of understanding. So this way of teaching has been known to be the most effective way of teaching in like back 2,600 years ago, but also till today. So last year I attended some training course on how to train people. That means how to give presentations or how to educate. So I'm in my day job, so to speak, I educate in a different way. So I try to tell stories through data, through analytics. Yeah. So which is a very dry subject. And so what we are tasked to do is to, when we want to relay certain information to the audience, if it's a one-to-one, it's slightly easier because then through conversation, we try to figure out what is the level of the learner. And there are different models, based on our interaction with the learner. After a while, we will know or have a good guess where the learner is in terms of their understanding of a particular topic. And then the trainer will adjust the delivery of the content, same content, but adjust the delivery to suit the learner's profile. Now, if it were a larger group, let's say, then the delivery would be different. Not a whole lot different. The content may be similar, but in the sense that it might be more challenging to go at a deeper level than if that audience was someone known to the trainer. So very high level, helicopter level analogy, let's say, is TED Talks. So TED Talks, TED, TED Talks are talks where, people who may have are probably well versed in a certain topic. They may have written a certain book or made a discovery or whatever, and they want to share that with a wider audience. So that's why the tagline for TED Talks is ideas worth sharing. So how that delivery works is, if you notice, once you've watched a couple of TED Talks, the general delivery method is quite similar across the different speakers. They may have written a book or done a discovery of some sort, which they want to share, but they won't go into a lot of detail because the TED Talk is usually typically around 15, 20 minutes. So there's not a lot of time to go to detail. So what they'll do is they'll try to deliver the gist of it, of what they found or what they want to share. Or if they've written a book that they think is a great idea and want to share, then they can't possibly share everything about the book, but they will share what the gist of the book is all about, just enough so that the audience, whoever connects with it, is able to, let's say, whoever is able to connect with it will be emotionally engaged enough to go and investigate further on their own. So TED Talks are effective in that manner as a way of a brief but impactful introduction to, let's say, a good idea, brief enough to cover the gist of the idea, but also designed enough, brief enough, but also impactful enough so that the audience, hopefully the majority, if not everyone, because it's very hard to uh, cater to everyone's perception, but it's designed so that the vast majority of the audience or the listener, because these recordings are put up on YouTube, ideally get the listener to connect and be emotionally engaged enough to sorry. So I'm trying to borrow some concepts from famous entrepreneurial coaches here. Very similar, because they talk about selling and marketing from the point of educating the client or the customer. So again, it comes to education. So basically, the idea is a delivery in such a way that the vast majority of the audience or whoever the trainer is speaking to is first intellectually engaged. So we need to get them intellectually engaged first. That means from a thinking perspective, interested enough. Okay, so I use the example of TED Talks because most people who, well, I say most people, but TED Talks are quite famous, and then there's TEDx everywhere. So the idea is to get the vast majority of the audience or the listener intellectually engaged. That means from a thinking perspective, the listener is interested enough. That's the first step. And then hopefully that leads them to be emotionally committed to take action. Okay. And when I listened to their idea, then I thought, oh, wait, hang on a second. It's not very much different from how 2,600 years ago, how the Buddha taught. Okay. The only difference was there was no written material, let alone technology. Okay. So everything that was taught 2,600 years ago was through what's called oral transmission. That's what oral transmission is. Basically, all teachings are taught through uh, taught verbally. Yeah, there's no written material. Okay, so research has shown that if we take notes, if we write in a notebook when we are listening to someone, then there is a higher chance of retention in the brain. However, another way of doing it is to be completely listening. Okay, means not having any other thoughts, not being distracted at that moment, but being in the here and now, in that moment, listening to what the teacher is saying. And so the Buddha had this gift, the ability to, whether it's a one-on-one, someone that he's trying to help, or it's a larger audience, he has the ability to know or have the wisdom to know what is the level that he needs to cater to, level of understanding. We're talking about level of understanding of the Dhamma. And then deliver the discourse or the teaching in a way so that they are first intellectually engaged. That means they get interested first. Because if they're not interested, they will leave. And a famous example of that is the Madhupindika Sutta. And then 18. So right in the beginning, in the story, King Dandapani came, sought out the Buddha, asked him a simple question. The Buddha gave him a very simple answer. However, unfortunately for King Dandapani, he was not intellectually engaged. So at that point, he left. So it's a simple way of teaching, yet powerful because it is simple, but it's not easy. So the concept itself is simple, but the delivery is not easy, as in having the ability, which requires experience, which requires skill, having the ability to know what is the level of the learner at that point. What are they ready to receive at that point? And then the teacher has that ability to first come down to that level, get them intellectually engaged, wanting to know more first, and then leading them to being emotionally committed, meaning, okay, yes, I will do something about it. I will change. Okay, and that takes skill. All right. So let's come back to the reading. So within his own specialized sphere, Mahākaccāna generally starts not with a general topic, but with a short utterance of the Buddha, often one that is intuitive, poetic, or exhortatory in character. So here's trying to say, although Mahākaccāna's way of teaching, of delivery is quite similar to Venerable Sariputta's way of teaching, but it's generally not like how Venerable Sariputta would start with a topic and then break it down. His was more based on something that the Buddha stated, a short statement of the Buddha. Okay. So his exposition then unfolds by reformulating the nomic or inspirational phrasing of the Buddha statements in ways that link it up with more familiar frameworks of established doctrines, often the six spheres of sense and the practice of self-restraint. So here what it's trying to say is sometimes the Buddha says something, and what Venerable Mahākaccāna will do is take that statement, whatever the Buddha said, the short statement, and he will link it back to the frameworks of the Dhamma. What are the frameworks of the Dhamma? If those of you who remember, I need to dig at some point. Venerable Sister Kema drew this on those whiteboards, those big whiteboards. Yeah, because she used to say that, the teaching of the Buddha is like this big, if you imagine this big piece of tapestry that different components of the tapestry, different, the different parts of the tapestry are very cleverly woven together, And I think I didn't realize back then, but now as I continue to reflect, I kind of think that maybe, when Venerable Sister Kema drew that big picture on the whiteboard, and those of you who have it, otherwise I need to find it some next time, where she put, I guess she was trying to visualize that tapestry on a whiteboard, yeah? The different frameworks, right? Like, for example, the five precepts, yeah? The path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, yeah? the Noble Eightfold Path, the six sense basis, right? So how our six sense doors, how they are connected, and how that links to the 12 links of the dependent origination, etc., etc. So these are all the different frameworks in the Dhamma. And so what Venerable Mahākaccāna does is whenever the Buddha says a short statement, nobody quite understands it, the monks go to Mahākaccāna, then he will take that statement and he will link it to where in that framework of the Buddha's teachings. And then expound a little bit further, okay? So yet, despite their differences in emphasis, both these great disciples share a predilection for systematic analysis, and both display same concern for razor-sharp precision in their thinking. For this reason, no doubt, within the Theravada tradition, each elder has come to be regarded as the father of a particular methodology for interpreting the Dhamma that rose to the prominence in the early centuries of Buddhist literary history. Okay, so here, again, I have to mention a lot of the commentaries here, with respect, of course, to the authors, but these are commentaries, okay? So take it or leave it, yeah? We're not trying to say that you need to agree or align, yeah? So you take what commentaries are and then you go practice yourself, yeah? Using what you learn in the twin practice, check your practice, and yeah, ask questions, of course, and use your own wisdom, as what Bhante Vimalaramsi used to say, we are our own teacher, yeah, in the practice. Okay, so here in the commentary it says, Sariputta is, of course, viewed as the original systematizer of the Abhidhamma, which, according to tradition, he elaborated based on the outlines that the Buddha taught him during his periodic visits to the human realm while expounding the Abhidhamma to the Devas in the Tavatimsa heaven. Mahākaccāna is regarded as the author of an exegetical system embedded in two post-canonical works that exerted an important influence on the early Buddhist commentators. About these two works, the Petakopadesa and the Netipakarana, we shall have more to say below. Okay, so now we're going to try and go into the Majjhima Nikaya section. Okay, so the first sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya in which the Venerable Mahākaccāna plays a prominent role is the Madhupindika Sutta, MN 18, Honeyball Discourse, a title assigned to it by the Buddha himself, perhaps a unique instance of the master conferring a title upon a sutta spoken by a disciple. So the sutta opens on an occasion when the Blessed One is dwelling at the city of Kapilavatthu in his native land, the Sakyan Republic. So Kapilavatthu was where he grew up, and his father ruled that area. Okay, King Sudodana was his father, the ruler of the Sakyan kingdom, and Kapilavatthu was the capital. So one day while he was sitting in meditation in Nigroda's park, an arrogant Sakyan named Dandapani, so probably those days they just use kings as titles, but one can assume that they were more like, back in the days, you can imagine where that's not necessarily a single country, there would be many different pieces of land, and each ruler of the land would be like a chieftain, a lord, let's say. So I remember listening to one of the other talks that suggested that maybe the Buddha's father, Suddhodana, was more like a lord or chieftain of that particular county, let's say. And Dandapani, also a Sakyan, was a lord, a chieftain of another piece of Sakyan land. Who knows? We don't know. I'm not an expert in Buddhist history, but I presume there are some people out there who are experts in this area. Okay, so let's assume that they are both rulers of their own respective kingdoms. Let's put it that way. Okay, so Dandapani came to seek out the Buddha with a question, but wasn't very respectful. So came to ask in a deliberate, discourteous manner, a bit like testing him out, let's put it that way. And so it says, oh, what does the recluse Gautama assert? What does he proclaim? So in a way, and also quite common those days, whenever they meet with some religious teachers who have followers, they want to find out what are they trying to teach? What are they proclaiming? So similarly, Dandapani went to ask the Buddha the same question. What does the recluse Gautama assert? What does he proclaim? It means what does he teach in general? Or what is he trying to announce to the world, let's say? And the Buddha replies with an answer intended to underscore his own refusal to be dragged into the type of conflict that his questioner wants to instigate. So here, what the commentary is trying to suggest is when the Buddha provided an answer to Dandapani, he didn't just intend to answer the question as is. He was also trying to answer in a way to kind of, I don't want to get into this conversation with you because it's not going anywhere. Do you know what I mean? So sometimes we find ourselves, whether at work or just some random people that we meet at an event or whatever, that there are some people like that. Maybe it's due to, oh, what's the word now? Inferiority complex is a terminology that people use nowadays to explain how um, you know, it's not okay. I'm often reminded, this is similar but not quite the same. I'm often reminded by something that I think Bhante Vimalaramsi used to say, or was it Venerable Sister Kim? I can't remember. When someone directs a certain anger at us, yeah, maybe they could be scolding us or they could be saying some things that are not very nice. And what is common, I notice nowadays, is what's called passive aggressive. So passive aggressive approach means the other party is either due to lack of trust or angry about something, whatever the topic is, but they don't want to sound angry because if they sound angry, it makes them look bad, and they don't want to look bad. They want to be the good person. They want the other party to look bad or feel bad. So what is the approach that they do? They use passive aggressiveness. That means they are aggressive, but try not to make it sound aggressive because they don't want to look bad. But it's enough to make the other party hurt. Okay, so they are projecting a form of anger as well, but not through violence, not through a pitch, let's say, not through very loud sound, let's say, but through choice of words and through intonation. enough for the other party to kind of get the idea. This person is angry with me, okay, for one reason or another. However, I recall, our Bhante, Vimala Ramsey and Sister Kema used to say, quite often, such people, when they do that, they actually are angry at themselves about something, a certain topic. Could be the topic that they are talking to us about, could be some other thing. Maybe, I don't know, that morning they woke up and the cat or the dog peed on the bed. Unfortunately, that did happen to one of my friends recently, because the dog was of old age. So when a dog, just like when human beings, when you get to a certain age, normally we know this, especially for human beings. When the bladder control is out of control, then we know that, it's the time is near. What I've observed a matter of few months, maybe a year, I don't know, and before they will pass away. Okay. So in animals, it's the same thing. I just come to know recently, except that the time span is shorter. So what happened with my friend was that their pet dog, which had been with them for 14 years, so obviously the dog is getting old and the dog usually sleeps with them, and accidentally peed on the bed. So obviously, my friend's husband isn't too happy about it. Okay. So what I'm saying is sometimes some people get mad at us and we don't know whether they're angry about us because of the topic that they brought up or because the dog peed on their bed that morning. Okay. Whatever it is, they are angry. But quite often they're actually angry about themselves or they're angry at themselves. Maybe they're, for whatever reason, angry at themselves for not being able to control the situation. Maybe they like to control situations. Maybe they don't like change, whatever it is. However, they cannot see that. Most of us cannot. Um, I myself was kind of caught in that as well just this past week. Partly for many reasons, partly because I was in physical pain a lot, and so I lost my patience as well. But when I look back and dig a little bit deeper, asking myself how I got into that situation, of course, I apologized after as well. And then asked myself, was it the physical pain alone that caused me to get a little bit annoyed, losing my patience, or was it something else? Okay. And the uh it takes, let's put it this way, not everyone is willing to go through that process to connect with ourselves, to ask those questions. It takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of courage. And because it takes that amount of effort, to be honest, to dig deeper, most people would rather take the easier way out. And the easier way out is to direct that anger externally. Okay? Because we are human beings. When it comes to emotions, naturally we want to get it out of the body, especially when it's uncomfortable. And so most people who are not well trained, yeah, I myself included, we sometimes let that out. Yeah. Um, Quite often not in a very positive way. So here, what the Buddha is trying to say, King Dandapani, not he answers it shortly, but the underlying message is, I'm not interested to be dragged into your anger. That's what the Buddha is trying to say. Underlying message in his answer. Okay. But the Buddha didn't want to because he knew King Dandapani came like that. He knew if the Buddha answered something like, you know what? I'm not interested in talking to you right now, then King Dhanapani would just flare up even further because he was already at that level, his mind state. So the Buddha answered in what some people would say nowadays, a term that people use, in a politically correct manner, I'd say, or in a more, what's the word now? Help me out. In a more um, indirect approach, yet clear enough to send the message through. Okay. Again, that itself is a skill. Sometimes I wish I had that skill. I'm trying to train myself in that. Okay. It's a skill. It's a difficult skill because we need to have enough understanding, enough empathy, enough compassion for the other party first. And then we need to have the knowledge, skill, and wisdom to know how to deliver the message across so that the other party gets it. We can't control whether they take offense or not, but at least they get the message and don't drag us further into it. Because that kind of energy is a very negative energy. Okay, so we don't want to be dragged into it. Just like the Buddha didn't want to be dragged into the negative energy, we don't want to be dragged into such negative energies. Yeah. The other person's anger is the other person's problem, but they are trying to direct that anger to us. Okay. In other words, if we think of it further, not taking responsibility of that anger and making the other party responsible for their anger. So if we think of it in that manner, then it starts to not make sense. However, sometimes we tend to forget and we lose our cool, yeah, for certain reasons. But here's what the Buddha's technique was to try and answer in a way to not just say, I don't want to get into this conversation with you, but in a way that leaves a teaching so that those who hear it get further learning from it as well. This is a skill. The Buddha has this amazing skill. So what did the Buddha say to King Dandapani? Friend, I assert and proclaim such a teaching that one does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its Maras, and its Brahmas, in this generation, with its recluses and Brahmins, its princes and its people, such a teaching that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmin who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being. So what the Buddha is saying, this is what I teach. There's no point in quarreling with anyone in this world. Because the perceptions that everyone has different perception. They're all at different levels. So that's no point. And then the one who practices detach of any of these sensual pleasures without craving, without any kind of worry, are free from these kind of quarrels. Okay. And because the Buddha replied like this, which was not quite what King Dandapani expected. I don't know what he was expecting. Maybe he was expecting something similar to what other people teach. I don't know. I don't know what he was expecting. Okay. But it was not what he expected. And because the Buddha replied in a way that maybe was not his level of understanding, or I don't know, maybe he came with a discourteous manner, so his mind state was already shut. Yeah, I remember now less because I filter them better. But I know I've taught before music, yeah, just as an example. Some students who I turn up at the lesson, I know they don't want me to be there. The only reason I'm there is because their parents want them to pick up some kind of skill. And their parents have this idea that music as a skill is a good skill for learning for the brain, which is true, but only if the student is open to learn. So, there are times in the past I turn up and the student doesn't even have to say anything. It just comes through body language. It comes through the whole expression of that human being, you know, that the student is completely shut. And I've tested this many times, like even getting all my students, even down to now my 6-year-old student, she's 6-year-old. And I get them all to have a notebook. If it's 6-year-old, then I guide them further and I allow them more time to take down notes, etc. I don't write things for them. I get them to write it themselves. Why? Because hopefully that helps them retain better in their brain and also starts to inculcate a sense of responsibility for their own learning. So I have students like that as well. I even get them 10 years old, 12 years old. So definitely they can write properly, repeat the instructions. They write everything in the instructions, but do they ever remember what's in the instructions? Because I ask them again and again after, they say, no, you've never taught me that. I said, really? Look back at your instructions the recent week or month or whatever. True enough, the instructions are in the book. Why have they answered in a way that, no, you have not taught me those instructions? It's not because they are lying, but because their minds are shut. Even if the instructions are given, even if the instructions are written down by themselves in the notebooks, because the mind state is going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to learn this. Whatever this person is telling me doesn't make sense. It's already shut. The door is already shut. And so anything that is mentioned by whoever, even by the Buddha, is incomprehensible. So it could be that situation as well. I don't know, is my honest answer. But in any case, Dandapani found the reply utterly incomprehensible, raised his eyebrows in bewilderment, and departed, left. Later in the evening, the Buddha informs the bhikkhus what had transpired. One monk inquires, what exactly is the teaching that the Blessed One proclaims, whereby one can avoid all quarrels and at the same time be free from the pernicious influence of craving? The Buddha answers with the following statement. Bhikkhus, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a person, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome, and hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendencies to lust, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, the desire for being, and ignorance. This is the end of reliance on rods and weapons, of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malice, and false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. And having said this before the monks even has the time to ask for explanation, the Lord Buddha rises from his seat and enters his dwelling. And after the Buddha has retired, the bhikkhus ponder his statement, realizing that they cannot understand it on their own. They consider the Venerable Mahākaccāna is praised by the teacher and esteemed by his wise companions in the holy life. He is capable of expounding the detailed meaning. Suppose we went to him and asked the meaning of this. So when they approached Mahākaccāna and made their request, he first charged them for coming to him rather than asking the Buddha to clarify. To come to him when the Blessed One is present, he says, is like seeking hardwood among the branches and leaves of a great tree after passing over the trunk. So as Bhante Vimalaramsi used to explain one of the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, he went into detail what a hardwood is. So in the tree trunk, if I recall very vaguely, the hardwood is at the center of the trunk. So what Mahākaccāna is saying, you come to me now instead of going to the Buddha is here, you come to me. It's like you just bypass the tree trunk to the branches and leaves trying to look for the heart of the trunk. How is that possible? How is that logical? Is what Mahākaccāna is trying to say. So the blessed, I guess this is one example where Mahākaccāna actually did use an analogy. Simple one, small one. And the Blessed One is the one who knows and sees. He is vision, he is knowledge. He has become the Dhamma, become the Holy One. He is the sayer, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, the giver of the deathless, the Lord of the Dhamma, the Tathagata. And the bhikkhus, however, while admitting that the elder's reproach is warranted, that means they admitted to Mahākaccāna, okay, yeah, you have a point. We accept that. We are at fault, okay? Still insist that he himself is well qualified to explain the meaning. So they still go, yeah, but can you still please explain to us? And finally, the elder Mahākaccāna consents. He then gives the following explanation of the Buddha's brief statement. Dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meaning of the three is eye contact. With eye contact as condition, there is eye feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. What one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by that mental proliferation beset a person with respect to past, future, and present forms cognizable through the eye. So what it's trying to say, when we see something, right? How do we see? We see through the eye, this organ, the eye itself. But the eye itself cannot do anything if it doesn't have the form, the object. So if I have this cup or this box here, right? If there is no box, there is no cup. There is only the eye. There is nothing to see. Okay? So the form, the object itself has to be there, right? In the same manner, the person has to be there. So dependent on my eye, the organ, and the form, whether it's an object, static object, or a person, human being, animal, flower, tree, whatever, depending on that, too, eye consciousness arises. The consciousness with respect to the eye sense base, the eye organ, the consciousness related to the eye organ. So with eye organ and the form, dependent on these two, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three, eye, form, eye consciousness, when they come together, contact arises. When we have contact, then feeling arises. So the feeling is of the I like it, I don't like it, I'm neutral about it. Okay? So The most simple example that's commonly used is color. So our eye perceives different. What is color? Color is a reflection of the rays, the frequency, right? From uh, um, the uh, the light, sorry, the wave frequency that hits on the object, bounces back, reaches our eye, comes in the form of different colors. That is how our eye perceives different colors. So if let's say we take the color spectrum, let's say from white to black, and we have so many different colors, then different people will perceive white as I like white, I don't like white, or I'm neutral about white. I neither like nor dislike white. Similarly, black. Similarly, so many shades of red, blue, green, orange, etc. So that's the most basic form of explaining the feeling of I like, I don't like, or I neither like or dislike a certain form. When we feel that, then we perceive. Let me see if I can reach the 141. Give me 1 second because it's better to read from the. Oh, I would rather read from the text because I don't want to risk. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, 140. That's it. My memory isn't so good these days. Mm, By the nun to her. I remember stories better than names, but I guess that's also common for most people. 44, that's right. What am I looking at? Where are you? Is it the shorter or the longer? Dhammadina's conversation with Visakha. The shorter or the longer? Yeah. It's the longer discourse. Mahavedala, Majjhima Nikaya 43. Yeah, the section on perception, because here we're talking about perception. Of course, in that discourse, Bhikkhuni Dhammadina and her former husband Visakha, sorry, is this? No, that's 44. Sorry, 43, the longer discourse is Mahākaccāna with Sariputta. So there, Sariputta gives a very clear explanation, breakdown of what is consciousness, what is feeling, and what is perception. So since here we are covering these, I'll just read very quickly. From Majjhima Nikaya 43, Section 4, consciousness. Consciousness is said, friend, with reference to what is consciousness said. It cognizes, friend. That is why consciousness is said. What does it cognize? It cognizes this is pleasant. It cognizes this is painful. It cognizes this is neither pleasant nor painful. It cognizes, friend. That is why consciousness is said. Wisdom and consciousness, friend, are these states conjoined or disjoined? And is it possible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them? Wisdom and consciousness, friend, these states are conjoined, not disjoined, and it is impossible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them. For what one wisely understands, that one cognizes. For what one cognizes, that one wisely understands. So the word cognize, as Bhante Vimalaramsi used to say, nowadays we say recognize or recognize, means what is cognizable through the eye. We recognize something, we recognize the form. So that's what the consciousness is. It cognizes, it recognizes means re means like repeating. Cognizes, so we see the cup, we cognize. Cup, recognize, recognize. It's a cup. Feeling. Feeling is said, friend, with reference to what is feeling. It feels, friend. That is why feeling is said. What does it feel? It feels pleasure. It feels pain. It feels neither pain nor pleasure. It feels, friend. That is why feeling is said. So that's what we just mentioned, the feeling. Okay? Perception. Here's where we paused just now. Perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. Perception is said, friend. With reference to what is perception said? It perceives, friend. That is why perception is said. What does it perceive? It perceives blue, it perceives yellow, it perceives red, and it perceives white. It perceives, friend. That is why perception is said. Feeling, perception, and consciousness, friend. Are these states conjoined or disjoined? Is it possible to separate each of these states from the others in order to describe the difference between them? Feeling, perception, and consciousness, friend, these states are conjoined, not disjoined, and it is impossible to separate each of these states from the others in order to describe the difference between them. For what one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one cognizes. Let me see if 44 had something as well. So 44 had more on feeling. After the section on identity, the I, Noble Eightfold Path, concentration, formation, cessation, then feeling. So Visakha then asked Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, Lady, how many kinds of feeling are there? Friend Visakha, there are 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither pleasant nor painful feeling. But lady, what is pleasant feeling? What is painful feeling? What is neither pleasant nor painful feeling? And this is a form of question that's really good. And I find that lacking more and more, especially as we grow older as adults. But kids have this innate ability, especially those where we build trust, to be able to ask further and further. And this is a very good quality or habit to have. Friend Visakha, whatever is felt bodily or mentally as pleasant and soothing is pleasant feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as painful and hurting is painful feeling. So here what Bhikkhuni Dhammadina is saying is not only a bodily feeling, it is also a mental feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as neither soothing nor hurting is neither painful nor pleasant. Lady, what is pleasant and what is painful in regard to pleasant feeling? What is painful and what is pleasant in regard to painful feeling? What is pleasant and what is painful in regard to neither pleasant nor painful feeling? Friend Visakha, pleasant feeling is pleasant when it persists and painful when it changes. Painful feeling is painful when it persists and pleasant when it changes. Neither pleasant nor painful feeling is pleasant when there is knowledge of it, and painful when there is no knowledge of it. So Visakha is very good in this way of asking questions, really digging deep. Okay, so I won't go into further Majjhima Nikaya 43 and 44, but I hope I've left enough so that the listener is intellectually engaged enough to go and find out a little bit further. Okay, we have recordings and the suttas are available online as well. All right, so let's come back to here. The same pattern is repeated for each of the other sense bases. The elder then connects the entire exposition with the principle of conditionality, showing how each term in the series arises in dependence on the preceding term and ceases with the cessation of its predecessor. And this passage, rich in implications, offers a penetrative account of the process by which the deluded mind becomes overwhelmed by its own imaginary creations, its distorted perceptions and mental constructs. The sequence begins as a straightforward description of the conditioned genesis of cognition. Each type of consciousness arises in dependence on its respective sense and faculty and object. The process unfolds in the natural order through contact, feeling, and perception as far as the stage of thinking. But in the unenlightened worldling, or the Pali term that's used for unenlightened worldling is putujana, okay, who lacks correct insight into the true nature of things at the stage of thinking. Cognition is vitiated by the influence of papancha, a difficult Pali word best rendered as conceptual proliferation. So instead of correctly comprehending the objects of perception, the deluded mind infiltrated by papancha, conceptual proliferation, the start of the storytelling basically, spins out a complex mental commentary that embellishes things with the erroneous notion of mine, I, myself. Thereby, the person is overrun by the perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. Papancha nya sankha. So this happens throughout the day for most of us. At least for me, I can attest to that. And if we're not careful, can get carried away quite quickly because the spinning from the point the feeling, perception, and consciousness arises up to the papancha, conceptual proliferation, is very quick. And when that goes into the I, me, mind state, it spins out of control very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. Okay, so it takes our practice and certain level of mindfulness to be able to catch ourselves out of that. And if we are lacking that, then at least have sufficient kalyana mittas to pull us out before we do more damage, both to ourselves and to others. Okay, so the underlying springs of this conceptual proliferation are three defilements: craving, tanha, conceit, mana, wrong view, ditti. When these three gain control of the thought process, cognition runs wild, spilling out a host of delusive ideas, obsessions, passions that overpower the subject and reduce him to their helpless victim, which is us. We become the victims of our delusive ideas, obsessions, and passions. Okay. And this process of sense perception, as Mahākaccāna shows, is the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a person, referred to by the Buddha in his brief statement. When there is no delighting in the process of perception by way of craving, which elaborates upon experience in terms of the notion mind, when there is no welcoming it by way of conceit, which introduces the notion I am, when there is no holding to it by way of wrong view, which proliferates in notions of a self, or this is me, this is mine, this is myself, even this whole form, this whole body. I recently listened to podcasts by an innovator. He's building he's building interesting stuff. He is an educator, so he's not only innovating for the sake of innovating, but for the sake of teaching kids. Dr. Greg Gage, I think his name is. Was very so he is a neuroscientist, but he's so interested to introduce neuroscience concepts in the form of very simple experiments to children. And he is saying how he went through his experiments, he's just so blown away by how the body or the brain is made up of different neurons sending signals to each other. And then it got him thinking to like, then who is this person that, is just a collection of, or who is this brain, or who is this person that's thinking, but it's just a collection of different neurons firing, off every, I don't know what they say, not even microsecond, even shorter time frame than that. So, of course, he's approaching it from a very scientific perspective, right? But he was just sharing how, his innovations, his discoveries have led him to think in a very different way as a human being. But that is more from the very technical perspective. So the way the Buddha taught is application. Very much how can we apply, let's say, what the Buddha knows about how the human being functions from a scientific perspective. But what the Buddha is interested in is not just the scientific perspective of how things work, but how we can apply this so that we can put an end to suffering. That is what the Buddha's focus is. Okay. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. I just thought science is having new discoveries more and more, especially neuroscience. So it's all getting quite interesting. Okay. When there is no holding to it by way of wrong view, which proliferates in notions of a self, then all the underlying tendencies to the defilements will be uprooted, and one can dwell in the world as a liberated sage, holy and wise, without quarrels, conflicts, and disputes. Such was the explanation of the Buddha's words that Mahākaccāna offered to the monks. And afterwards, the monks approached the Blessed One, told him what Mahākaccāna had said. And the Buddha replied the words of highest praise for his disciples. Mahākaccāna is wise because Mahākaccāna is great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that Mahākaccāna has explained. Such is the meaning of this, and so you should remember it. Just then, the Venerable Ananda, standing nearby, added a memorable simile to highlight the beauty of Mahākaccāna's exposition. Just as if a man exhausted by hunger and weakness came upon a honey ball, in the course of eating it he would find a sweet, delectable flavor, so too, Venerable Sir, any able bhikkhu, in the course of scrutinizing with wisdom the meaning of this discourse on the Dhamma, would find satisfaction and confidence of mind. On the basis of this simile, the Buddha named the discourse the Madhupindika Sutta, the honey ball discourse. Okay, so I realize that we're running over time, so let's pause here because this particular chapter is a little bit long. So we'll just pause at the honey ball sutta for today, and we'll continue the other two Majjhima Nikayas. Okay. Also, because we digress a little bit, touched a little bit upon MN 43 and 44, which is the greater discourse on question and answer and the shorter discourse on question and answer. And those two discourses are also often used in the twin retreats. Okay, so very good to read them as well. So we will pause here. If anyone has anything they want to add, feel free.
That's a great reading, May. Thank you very much indeed. Very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Nanda. Yeah, just sometimes because I think in patterns, or my brain likes to think in patterns. So sometimes, as I'm reading it, sometimes and again, because it's a habit, as with all habits, can change. So, if I digress too much, or if I fall off topic, or if I go off tangent too much because of that, habitual tendency to connect different patterns, just feel free to catch me and grab me back. Okay. It's a habit. So there are pros and cons as with all habits. So I try to use it more as a benefit, even at work. But sometimes the cons are I digress very far. So feel free to drag me back anytime. I admire some of the twin guides and Bhante Dhammagavesi, Dr. Madhusudanji. They're very good at just, you know, sticking, this is it, this ship package to you, like that, as is, take it or leave it. I go off tangent a lot because of that habitual tendency of connecting. Let's put it this way. So I have this tendency, or my brain has this tendency to connect sometimes, today not so bad, but to connect or find connections between sometimes seemingly disparate ideas. So to others, they may not see a connection between the different patterns. But my brain sometimes goes, oh, wait, hang on, I can use this as an analogy for that because they're quite similar in that sense. And there's a connection. And for work, at least, and sometimes when I teach music, um, um, I try to use that habit more to benefit the other party. But when it gets out of control, um, this is what happens. I fall off course. Whoops. So feel free to catch me.
There's
Ah,
a couple of
sorry.
this pie is written few things, May. Very
I
interesting.
Pai, you're too kind. I am very far from that. It just means that I find connections. And I've recently met one other person who also likes to think in that manner. It's sometimes it just has to do with, how as a child we were educated, let's say, or um, uh, because a large part of my childhood was in music education. So I trained in two instruments, and music is just filled with patterns. That's how music is designed. It's just a whole, okay, let's put it this way, a piece of music, any piece of music, technically speaking, is just a group of patterns strung together so that it tells a story through sound. That's what music is, through different pitches. That's what music is. It's just a big piece of a collection of patterns um, strung beautifully together to make it um, seemingly perceived through the ear as pleasant or painful. In some kind of music, could be painful to some, or neither pleasant nor painful. See? Okay, let's share some merits. Okay, but I'm definitely definitely very far from. Oh, I've got a lot of work to do. Oh dear. Okay, let's share some merits. Yeah. So I hope you can see my screen sharing merits. Let's share some merits together. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and birth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Thank you so much for dialing in. Have a good week. Take
Hope
care.
you'll get better very soon, okay?
I'll be all right.
Sure.
It's just an old injury that needs to be worked through. That's all. Take care too, Madam Nanda. Take care. Bye bye. Take care, everyone who dialed in. Paul. Bye. Gopinath. Thanks for dialing in. Take care. Bye bye.